One of the things that makes Boswell's Life of Johnson such a compelling read is that it's a book about friendship. It's a testament to friendship and to a relationship which is surprising, unusual. A friendship across generations, a friendship across a sort of cultural divide, and very much a political divide. And it's sort of like a strange friendship, but it's obviously a very meaningful friendship. And one of the basic underlying central messages of the book is that these relationships are sustaining and necessary and important in life. But there's another sort of aspect of that relationship, and that is Boswell has the capacity to be brutal when he talks about Samuel Johnson and talks about his opinion on Samuel Johnson, and he describes Samuel Johnson to the reader. And these criticisms and dismissals, at times it could feel like Boswell's almost mocking Johnson. They occur throughout the book. And I just wanted to highlight 5 examples of that to give a sense of the way Boswell can be really harsh on Johnson. Makes you wonder, if Johnson were alive, if he were reading this book, how he would feel about it. And these 5 examples are all taken from the first 250 pages. So right all from the beginning of the book. And so example number 1, this is page 56. And to this point, Boswell is sort of filling in the biography of Johnson's life from before he ever met Johnson. So he's sort of pulling from all sorts of different sources, and he's very spare at this point in the biography. He talks about his marriage, Johnson's marriage to Elizabeth Porter. Johnson was 25 years old when he married Mrs. Porter, who was a 48-year-old widow and mother of 3. And again, Boswell has very little to say about the marriage, but he manages to insert certain anecdotes that feel very indiscreet, that make you wonder, where is Boswell's sensitivity, his discretion in giving these anecdotes? And so really one of the only stories we get about Johnson's married life is from his wedding day. And this again is on page 56. We have the story being told by Johnson, it's a quote from Johnson, about his experience on his wedding day. So Johnson says, quote, "She had read the old romances and had got into her head the fantastical notion that a woman of spirit should use her lover like a dog. So, sir, at first she told me that I rode too fast, and she could not keep up with me. And when I rode a little slower, she passed me, and complained that I lagged behind. I was not to be made the slave of caprice, and I resolved to begin as I meant to end. I therefore pushed on briskly till I was fairly out of her sight. The road lay between 2 hedges, so I was sure she could not miss it, and I contrived that she should soon come up with me. When she did, I observed her to be in tears." End quote. So that's obviously sad, a bit of a rocky start to their marriage. And Boswell gives us this anecdote, and then he gives his commentary. And he loves this sort of like biting understatements. This is sort of like the style, the technique he uses throughout the book. Boswell says, "This, it must be allowed, was a singular beginning of connubial felicity. But there is no doubt that Johnson, though he thus showed a manly firmness, proved a most affectionate and indulgent husband." End quote. And so you get the sense that he's sort of delighting in this bizarre episode, this singular beginning of connubial felicity. So that is just example number 1 of one of these really brutal Boswellian anecdotes. Just shortly after, Boswell talks about an episode where Johnson tried his hand at being a teacher. And Boswell is going to make very clear to us and not pull any punches in telling us that Johnson was a terrible teacher. Here we go. Boswell. The truth, however, is that he, namely Johnson, was not so well qualified for being a teacher of elements and a conductor in learning by regular gradations, as men of inferior powers of mind. His own acquisitions had been made by fits and starts, by violent eruptions into the regions of knowledge, and it could not be expected that his impatience would be subdued, and his impetuosity restrained, so as to fit him for a quiet guide to novices. The art of communicating instruction, of whatever kind, is much to be valued, yet I am of opinion that the greatest abilities are not only not required for this office, but render a man less fit for it. End quote. And so if that wasn't harsh enough, we now get another one of these anecdotes. Again, it has this sort of like unseemly character to it. And he's going to describe on the next page the way the students reacted to Johnson the teacher. Quote, from Mr. Garrick's account, he did not appear to have been profoundly reverenced by his pupils. Again, another example of this Boswellian understatement. He was not profoundly reverenced by his pupils. His oddities of manner, his uncouth gesticulations, could not but be the subject of merriment to them, and in particular, the young rogues used to listen at the door of his bedchamber, and peep through the keyhole, that they might turn into ridicule his tumultuous and awkward fondness for Mrs. Johnson, whom he used to name by the familiar appellation of Teddy or Tetsy, which to us seems ludicrous when applied to a woman of her age and appearance. He's going to continue with a quote from Mr. Garrick, but again, this is brutal. I mean, this is cruel. Mr. Garrick described her to me as very fat, with a bosom of more than ordinary protuberance, and swelled cheeks of florid red produced by thick painting. I have seen Garrick exhibit her by his exquisite talent for mimicry, so as to excite the heartiest bursts of laughter. End quote. So there you go. So that was 3. Skipping now, further in the book, in this opening section, page 121. Boswell he's talking about the Rambler, which is this periodical that Johnson wrote for a while. And he does this misdirection. He does this complicated maneuver. He does it a few times in the book, where he sounds like he's going to launch a heroic defense of Johnson. And he starts off with this like bold, defensive language saying criticisms that people are leveling are incorrect, they're invalid. But then he like talks too much, and he like goes into the weeds too deeply, and he just seems to be affirming all those criticisms. And he seems to really fail at trying to defend Johnson. So here we go. Quote, the style of this work has been censured by some shallow critics as involved and turgid, and abounding with antiquated and hard words. So now this bold defense. Quote, so ill-founded is the first part of this objection, that I will challenge all who may honor this book with a perusal to point out any English writer whose language conveys his meaning with equal force and perspicuity. And now the qualifications start to come in. It must indeed be allowed that the structure of his sentences is expanded, and often has somewhat of the inversion of Latin, and that he delighted to express familiar thoughts in philosophical language. But let us attend to what he himself says in his concluding paper. When common words were less pleasing to the ear, or less distinct in their signification, I have familiarized the terms of philosophy by applying them to popular ideas. Okay, so that is Boswell's first defense. And now the second defense, defending the claim that he uses hard words. Here we go, quote, "And as to the second part of this objection, upon a late careful revision of the work, I can with confidence say that it is amazing how few of those words for which it has been unjustly characterized are actually to be found in it. I am sure not the proportion of one to each paper." And then he goes on to elaborate, and he starts talking about the way that Johnson would sometimes make up words when he felt like a word wasn't available. And so again, in trying to defend Johnson, he sort of explicates and goes into depth about why these criticisms were leveled in the first place. Last example of Boswell's voice, which seems to be pretty brutal and critical. Johnson seems to have been a person of contradictions, of paradoxes, of hypocrisies, and Boswell was really fascinated by those. There's times when Johnson would give, Boswell these like firm injunctions about how he should live and what he should do, and then Boswell will editorialize and say, "Dear reader, you should know that Johnson is a hypocrite. He used to never do this in his own life at all." And so Boswell loves to highlight these hypocrisies in Johnson. And so here we go. It's page 246. Quote, "At supper this night, he talked of good eating with uncommon satisfaction. Some people, said he, have a foolish way of not minding or pretending not to mind what they eat. For my part, I mind my belly very studiously and very carefully, for I look upon it that he who does not mind his belly will hardly mind anything else. He now appeared to me, Jean Bull philosophe, and he was, for the moment, not only serious, but vehement. Yet I have heard him, upon other occasions, talk with great contempt of people who were anxious to gratify their palates, and the 206th number of his Rambler is a masterly essay upon glossity. His practice, indeed, I must acknowledge, may be considered as casting the balance of his different opinions upon the subject. For I never knew any man who relished good eating more than he did. When at table, he was totally absorbed in the business of the moment. His looks seemed riveted to his plate, nor would he, unless when in very high company, say one word, or even pay the least attention to what was said by others, till he had satisfied his appetite, which was so fierce, and indulged with such intenseness, that while in the act of eating, the veins of his forehead swelled, and generally a strong perspiration was visible. To those whose sensations were delicate, this could not but be disgusting, and it was doubtless not very suitable to the character of a philosopher, who should be distinguished by self-command." End quote. And so there you go. That's just to give a taste of these sort of Boswellian criticisms that we get scattered throughout the book. Let me know if you are also a very voracious eater who sweats profusely when they eat. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching.